What happens when a most dangerous woman in the room looks like the least threatening person there? Sarah Martinez learned this lesson the hard way when a routine security checkpoint became a moment that would expose the hidden world of elite military operations. Sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in plain sight, carrying secrets that could reshape everything you think you know about power, protection, and the thin line between ordinary life and extraordinary duty. This is the true story of how one woman's identity reveal at an airport security checkpoint sent shockwaves through multiple government agencies, exposed a network most people never knew existed, and proved that heroes don't always look the way movies taught us they should. Some stories begin with obvious drama. Others start with a simple question, "Ma'am, can you step aside for additional screening?" This story began with that question, but ended with answers no one saw coming. The machine doesn't lie, but sometimes the truth it reveals can change everything. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at Reagan National Airport as Sarah Martinez approached the security checkpoint with a weary resignation of someone who traveled far too often for work. At first glance, she appeared unremarkable, a woman in her early 30s wearing dark jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a navy blue sweater that had seen better days. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a worn leather messenger bag that looked like it belonged to a graduate student or junior office worker. The TSA agents barely glanced at her as she placed her laptop in a gray plastic bin and stepped toward the metal detector. This was routine for Sarah, who made this journey from Washington, D.C. to various locations around the country at least twice a month. What wasn't routine was the new facial recognition system that had been installed the week before. Agent Mike Thompson had been working airport security for 7 years, long enough to develop what his colleagues called the eye, an ability to spot potential problems before they became actual problems. But as Sarah approached his station, nothing about her triggered any alarms in his experienced mind. She looked like thousands of other business travelers he processed every day. "Good morning," Sarah said politely, handing over her driver's license and boarding pass. Her voice carried a slight accent that Thompson couldn't quite place. Maybe Southwestern, possibly California. Her ID showed a Virginia address in Arlington, which made sense given how many government contractors lived in the area. Thompson scanned the license with practiced efficiency, then gestured toward the new biometric scanner. "We're testing some new equipment today. Would you mind stepping over here for a quick facial scan?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment, a flicker of something passing across her features that Thompson almost missed. It wasn't fear exactly, but wariness. The kind of expression he sometimes saw on people carrying large amounts of cash or those traveling with items they weren't entirely sure were allowed. "Is there a problem with my ID?" she asked, maintaining her polite tone, but shifting her weight slightly. Thompson noticed she now stood with her feet positioned in a way that would allow for quick movement in any direction. "No problem at all," Thompson assured her. "It's just a new system we're required to test on random passengers. Takes about 10 seconds. Sarah nodded and stepped up to the scanner. The machine hummed quietly as blue light swept across her face, analyzing dozens of facial recognition points and comparing them against multiple government databases. Thompson expected the familiar green light that meant cleared for travel, the same result that processed 99.9% of passengers without incident. Instead, the machine beeped 3 times, a sound Thompson had never heard before. The screen flashed yellow, then orange, then settled on a bright red display that read, "Hold for supervisor. Do not process." Thompson frowned and looked at the screen again, certain there had been some malfunction. He'd processed over 3,000 passengers since the new system was installed, and nothing like this had happened before. He glanced at Sarah, who now stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "I'm going to need to get my supervisor," Thompson said, reaching for his radio. "This might take a few minutes." Sarah's response surprised him. "That's fine," she said calmly. "I understand these new systems sometimes have glitches." But Thompson noticed that her hands now rested at her sides in a way that seemed deliberate, and her eyes were scanning the area around them with the methodical precision of someone conducting a threat assessment. Supervisor Lisa Chun arrived within 2 minutes, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to obvious confusion as she examined the screen. Chun had 23 years of experience in airport security, including time with customs enforcement and federal air marshals. She'd seen drug dealers, money launderers, suspected terrorists, and people on every kind of watch list imaginable. But she'd never seen a red alert with no explanation code. "Run it again," Chin instructed Thompson. "Sometimes these new machines hiccup." Sarah stepped back up to the scanner without protest. Again, the blue light swept across her face. Again, the machine beeped 3 times and flashed red. This time, however, additional text appeared on the screen. "Priority verification required. Contact system administrator." Chin studied Sarah more carefully now, taking in details she'd missed during her initial assessment. The woman appeared completely calm, almost professionally so. Her breathing was steady, her posture relaxed but alert. Most passengers would be showing signs of stress by now. Fidgeting, asking questions, checking their watches. Sarah simply waited, as if standing perfectly still while armed federal agents figure out what to do was something she did every Tuesday. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see if you have any other identification with you," Chin said. "Sometimes people travel under different names for business purposes, and that can confuse the system." Sarah reached into her messenger bag with slow, deliberate movements and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, she withdrew a second ID card and handed it to Chun without a word. Chun looked at the card and felt her blood pressure spike. It was a military identification card, but not the standard green dependent or retiree ID she was used to seeing. This card was black with silver text, and it bore designations she'd never encountered before. At the top, instead of United States Military, it read Special Operations Command. Below Sarah's photo and basic information was a clearance level that made Chin's hands shake slightly. "Agent Thompson," Chin said quietly, her voice carrying a new tone of authority mixed with uncertainty. "I need you to step back and give us some space." Thompson moved away, but he couldn't help stealing glances at the two women. His supervisor was now speaking in hushed tones into her radio, using codes he didn't recognize. Meanwhile, Sarah remained motionless, except for her eyes, which continued their systematic survey of the terminal around them. Chin finished a radio conversation and turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me to a private screening area while we sort this out." "Of course," Sarah replied. "But you should know that my flight boards in 43 minutes, and I'm expected at my destination." There was something about the way she said "expected" that made Chin realize this wasn't a routine business trip. She led Sarah through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" into a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a computer terminal. "Can you tell me the nature of your travel today?" Chin asked, settling into her chair while Sarah remained standing. "I can tell you that I'm traveling on official business, and that delaying my departure could have consequences beyond what either of us wants to deal with," Sarah said. Her tone remained polite, but there was an edge to it now that suggested she was running out of patience. Chin typed Sarah's information into her computer and waited for the system to respond. When it did, her screen filled with text, but most of it was blocked out with black bars. What she could see made her stomach clench with sudden anxiety. The visible portions showed military commendations, deployment records to locations that were classified above Chin's security level, and training certifications in subjects that range from advanced weapon systems to counterterrorism operations. At the bottom of the screen, in bold red letters, was a notification that made Chin's mouth go dry. "Contact Special Operations Command immediately. Do not detain without direct authorization." Chin looked up at Sarah, who was now checking her watch. "How long have you been working for Special Operations Command?" "Long enough to know that this conversation is probably being monitored by people with more authority than either of us has," Sarah replied. "And long enough to know that every minute I spend in this room is a minute I'm not where I'm supposed to be." As if summoned by her words, Chin's desk phone rang. She answered it cautiously. "Airport Security, Supervisor Chin speaking." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "Supervisor Chun, this is Colonel Martinez at Special Operations Command. I understand you have one of our people in secondary screening." Chin glanced at Sarah, whose expression hadn't changed. "Yes, sir." The facial recognition system flagged her for additional verification. Supervisor Chun, you are to release her immediately and provide any assistance necessary to ensure she makes her flight. This is a direct order from Special Operations Command. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Chun replied, though her mind was racing with questions she knew she couldn't ask. Understood. She hung up the phone and looked at Sarah, who was now studying her with obvious amusement. I take it that was someone who could verify my identity? That was your boss? Chun asked. One of them, Sarah said simply. Now about my flight. Chun stood up, her movements uncertain. In 23 years of security work, she'd never encountered anything like this. She'd processed celebrities, politicians, high-ranking military officers, and even suspected terrorists. But she'd never met someone who carried themselves with such quiet confidence while simultaneously appearing completely ordinary. Of course, Chun said. Agent Thompson will escort you back to the checkpoint, and make sure you get through without any further delays. As they walked back through the terminal, Chun couldn't help but steal glances at Sarah. The woman moved with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive training, but she'd been so unassuming initially that Chun had completely missed it. Now, watching more carefully, she noticed the way Sarah's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, how she maintained awareness of everyone within a 20-foot radius, and how she positioned herself to maintain clear sight lines and exit routes. At the security checkpoint, Thompson expedited Sarah through with the efficiency of someone who'd received very clear instructions from a supervisor. He handed back her identification cards with noticeably more respect than he'd shown initially. Have a safe flight, Thompson said, and meant it. Sarah smiled, the first genuine expression Chun had seen from her. Thank you, both of you. I know this was unusual, and I appreciate your professionalism. As Sarah walked toward her gate, Chun turned to Thompson. What do you think she does? Thompson watched Sarah's retreating figure until she disappeared into the crowd. I don't know, he admitted, but I don't think we're supposed to know. Chun nodded, still processing what had just happened. She'd always assumed that the most dangerous people were the ones who looked dangerous, the obviously armed, the visibly aggressive, the people who set off every alarm bell in a security professional's mind. But Sarah Martinez had taught her something new. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. Back at her desk, Chun found herself staring at her computer screen at the heavily redacted file that contained more black bars than actual information. She realized that in 23 years of security work, she'd been operating under the assumption that she had some understanding of who was traveling through her checkpoint and why. Today, she'd learned that there were people moving through the world carrying secrets she couldn't even imagine, pursuing missions she'd never hear about, serving purposes that remained completely hidden from view. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead, Chun found it oddly comforting. If people like Sarah Martinez were out there, quietly doing whatever it was they did, then maybe the world was safer than she'd realized. Maybe there were protections in place that she'd never considered, guardians working in shadows she'd never imagined. But one question continued to nag at her as she watched the normal flow of passengers resume through her checkpoint. If Sarah Martinez was remarkable enough to trigger a system response that required intervention from Special Operations Command, what did that say about the nature of her work? And more importantly, where was she going, and what was she planning to do when she got there? The answers to those questions would prove to be far more complex and far more important than Chun could have possibly imagined. Sarah Martinez settled into seat 14A on the Boeing 737, grateful for the window seat that would allow her to maintain visual contact with the aircraft's surroundings during boarding. To her fellow passengers, she appeared to be just another business traveler, perhaps heading to a conference or client meeting in Denver. Her laptop bag fit neatly under the seat in front of her, and she'd already pulled out a paperback novel, a thriller that she'd read twice before, but found useful for maintaining a relaxed appearance. What her fellow passengers couldn't see was the small communication device embedded in her watch, currently receiving encrypted updates about her mission status. They also couldn't see the specialized equipment concealed within her seemingly ordinary messenger bag, or the fact that every movement she made was calculated to maintain operational security while appearing completely natural. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh noticed Sarah during the pre-flight safety demonstration, primarily because Sarah was one of the few passengers actually paying attention. Most business travelers had heard this safety speech hundreds of times and used the opportunity to check emails or review documents. But Sarah watched intently, her eyes following the attendant's gestures toward exit rows and noting the location of life vests and oxygen masks with the focus of someone for whom emergency procedures were more than theoretical considerations. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sarah's watch vibrated once, a coded signal indicating that her contact in Denver had confirmed the meeting location. She responded by adjusting her watch face, a seemingly casual gesture that transmitted her acknowledgement back through encrypted channels. 30,000 feet over Kansas, Sarah found herself sitting next to Dr. Robert Kim, a pediatric surgeon heading to Denver for a medical conference. Dr. Kim was the kind of traveler who enjoyed airplane conversations, and he'd been making polite small talk since takeoff. Business or pleasure? Dr. Kim asked as Sarah closed her novel. Business, Sarah replied with a smile. Consulting work. What kind of consulting? If you don't mind me asking. Sarah had perfected this conversation through years of practice. Risk assessment and security consulting. I help companies evaluate their vulnerability to various kinds of threats. It wasn't entirely untrue. Sarah did assess threats and develop security strategies. The fact that those threats typically involved international terrorism, weapons trafficking, and hostile foreign intelligence services was information that Dr. Kim didn't need to possess. That sounds fascinating, Dr. Kim said. With everything going on in the world today, I imagine there's a lot of demand for that kind of work. More than you might think, Sarah agreed. People generally don't realize how many potential threats exist until something goes wrong. Doktor, Kim no dit kunojin. It's like medicine in that way. People don't think about their health until there's a problem. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Dr. Kim reminded her of her father, who'd been a high school science teacher before his retirement. There was something comforting about talking to someone whose biggest concerns involved healing people rather than stopping those who wanted to harm them. Do you travel much for your work? Dr. Kim asked. Quite a bit, Sarah replied. Different cities, different types of problems. Every situation requires a different approach. Again, this was true, though Sarah's version of different approaches might include anything from deep cover infiltration to coordinated military operations. Her last assignment had taken her to Eastern Europe for 3 months, where she'd helped dismantle a network trafficking weapons to terrorist organizations. Before that, she'd spent 6 weeks in Southeast Asia working with local law enforcement to track down American citizens who'd been kidnapped by criminal organizations. It must be difficult to maintain relationships when you travel so much, Dr. Kim observed. Sarah paused, considering how to answer. This was the part of these conversations that always became complicated. How do you explain that your work requires a level of operational security that makes normal relationships nearly impossible? How do you describe the challenge of caring deeply about protecting people while being unable to share the details of that protection with anyone? It can be challenging, she said finally. The work is important, but it does require certain sacrifices. Dr. Kim seemed to sense that he'd touched on something personal. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. No need to apologize, Sarah assured him. It's just part of the job. What Sarah didn't tell Dr. Kim was that her current assignment was potentially the most important of her career. For 18 months, intelligence agencies had been tracking a network of individuals planning a coordinated attack on multiple American cities. The network was sophisticated, well-funded, and had managed to stay ahead of traditional law enforcement efforts. Sarah's mission was to make contact with a former network member who'd reached out through back channels, claiming to have information that could prevent the attacks. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning in Denver, a location that had been chosen for maximum security and minimum visibility. The informant, known only by the codename Meridian, had spent 3 years embedded within the terrorist network before developing doubts about their methods and goals. According to intelligence reports, Meridian had access to operational plans, funding sources, and personnel information that could allow authorities to roll up the entire network before any attacks could be carried out. But Meridian had insisted on dealing only with a specific operative, someone with enough experience and authority to guarantee protection in exchange for the intelligence. Sarah's reputation within Special Operations Command had made her the obvious choice for the assignment. As the plane began its descent toward Denver International Airport, Sarah's watch vibrated twice, a signal indicating that surveillance teams had confirmed the meeting location remained secure. She responded by stretching, a movement that activated a micro camera hidden in her sweater and transmitted a brief video feed to confirm her status and location. "Looks like we're almost there," Dr. Kim said, glancing out the window at the approaching city. Sarah followed his gaze, noting the geographic features and potential security considerations automatically. The Denver metropolitan area spread out below them, a mix of urban development and open space that could provide both opportunities and challenges for tomorrow's operation. "Dr. Kim," Sarah said as they prepared for landing, "it's been a pleasure talking with you. I hope your conference goes well." "Thank you," Dr. Kim replied, "and I hope your consulting work goes smoothly. Whatever threats you're helping people prepare for, I'm glad there are people like you working on these problems." Sarah smiled, touched by his words in a way that surprised her. People like me. If only he knew how few people there really were doing this kind of work, and how much the safety he took for granted depended on their success. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Sarah noticed something that immediately activated her threat assessment protocols. A man 3 rows behind her was exhibiting behaviors consistent with surveillance training. He'd been watching her throughout the flight using reflective surfaces. His movements were too controlled to be natural, and he was timing his preparation to ensure he'd leave the plane at the same time she did. Sarah shifted her preparation routine, using movements that appeared casual but allowed her to get a better look at the man. He was approximately 6 feet tall, athletic build, wearing clothes that suggested business travel but were cut in a way that could conceal weapons. Most importantly, he was trying too hard to avoid direct eye contact with her. The man's presence could be coincidental. Denver was a major business hub, and there were many legitimate reasons for someone to be on this flight. But Sarah's training and experience had taught her that coincidences in her line of work were usually anything but coincidental. As passengers began filing off the plane, Sarah deliberately slowed her movements, allowing several people to move ahead of her while maintaining awareness of the suspicious man's location. He responded by becoming more obviously impatient, confirming her suspicion that he was attempting to maintain visual contact with her. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. If the man was conducting surveillance, there were several potential explanations. He could be working for the terrorist network, attempting to identify and compromise the meeting with Meridian. He could be working for a foreign intelligence service that had somehow learned about the operation. Or he could be working for a domestic law enforcement agency that was conducting unauthorized surveillance on Special Operations Command activities. None of these possibilities were good. As she reached the gate area, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed paranoid to most people, but was simply prudent given her circumstances. She walked directly to the airport security office and requested to speak with the senior agent on duty. Agent David Fletcher had been working Denver International Airport security for 12 years, and he developed good instincts about when travelers were experiencing genuine problems versus when they were simply being difficult. The woman who approached his desk appeared calm and professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was dealing with a serious situation. "How can I help you?" Fletcher asked. Sarah showed him her military identification, watching his expression change as he processed the information. "Agent Fletcher, I need to report that I believe I'm under surveillance by an individual who is on my flight for Washington. The person may represent a threat to airport security or to ongoing federal operations." Fletcher's training kicked in immediately. Threats to federal operations were handled differently than typical passenger complaints, and the woman's identification indicated she had authority he needed to respect. "Can you describe the individual?" Fletcher asked, already reaching for his radio. Sarah provided a detailed description of the man, including his seat number, clothing, and the specific behaviors that had raised her suspicions. Fletcher relayed the information to his security teams and requested immediate location and identification of the individual. Within 10 minutes, Fletcher received a response that made him realize this situation was far more complex than a typical security concern. The man Sarah had identified was indeed conducting surveillance, but He was working for a federal agency that was supposed to be coordinating with Special Operations Command, not watching their operatives. "Ma'am," Fletcher said carefully, "it appears there may be some confusion between federal agencies regarding your presence here. Would you prefer to handle this internally, or would you like us to detain the individual for questioning?" Sarah considered the options quickly. If the man was working for a legitimate federal agency, detaining him could create bureaucratic problems that might compromise her mission. But if he was working for hostile forces, allowing him to continue surveillance could put both her and Meridian at risk. "I need to make a phone call," Sarah said. "Can you provide me with a secure location and ensure that the individual remains under observation until I can clarify his status?" Fletcher nodded and led Sarah to a private office equipped with secure communication equipment. As she placed her call to Special Operations Command, Sarah realized that what had started as a routine flight to a clandestine meeting was rapidly becoming a complex counterintelligence operation. The voice that answered her call was Colonel Martinez, the same officer who had resolved her airport security issue in Washington. "Sarah, I was expecting your check-in, but not this early. Has something happened?" Sarah briefed him quickly on the surveillance situation, providing details about the man's behavior and the airport security team's preliminary findings. Colonel Martinez listened without interruption, his silence indicating that he was processing information that concerned him. "Sarah," Colonel Martinez said finally, "we have a problem. The agency that man claims to be working for denied any knowledge of surveillance operations in Denver today. Either he's lying about his affiliation, or there's a security breach we didn't anticipate." Sarah felt her stomach clench. Security breaches in operations like this one could be catastrophic, not just for her mission, but for Meridian's safety. If hostile forces had learned about the meeting, they might already be moving to eliminate the informant before he could share his intelligence. "What are my orders, sir?" Sarah asked. "Proceed to the safe house as planned, but implement full counter-surveillance protocols. We're sending additional backup to your location, and we're moving Meridian to a secondary meeting site. You'll receive new coordinates within the hour." "Understood, sir." "Sarah," Colonel Martinez added, his tone carrying a weight that made her pay even closer attention, "this intelligence is critical to preventing attacks that could kill hundreds of people. We can't allow operational security concerns to prevent us from obtaining it. But we also can't allow you or Meridian to be compromised. Use your judgment, and remember that you have full authority to take whatever actions are necessary to complete this mission." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that what had begun as a routine flight had evolved into something far more dangerous and far more important than she'd initially understood. The man watching her wasn't just a surveillance problem. He was a potential indicator that the entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. Tomorrow's meeting with Meridian would either provide the intelligence needed to prevent a terrorist attack, or it would become a trap that could eliminate both the informant and one of Special Operations Command's most experienced operatives. Either way, Sarah Martinez was about to discover that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people no one ever sees coming. The safe house in suburban Denver looked like any other single-story ranch home in the quiet neighborhood of Lakewood. Sarah Martinez parked her rental car 2 blocks away and approached the location using a route that allowed her to observe potential surveillance while appearing to be a resident returning home from work. The October evening was cool, with enough cloud cover to provide natural concealment while maintaining adequate visibility for defensive operations. Sarah had spent the previous 3 hours implementing counter-surveillance protocols that would have impressed her instructors at the Special Operations Training Facility. She'd used 4 different vehicles, made 6 seemingly random stops at locations chosen to expose anyone attempting to follow her, and employed surveillance detection routes that only someone with extensive training could navigate while maintaining operational security. The house itself had been selected by Special Operations Command specifically for this type of meeting. It sat on a corner lot that provided clear sight lines in all directions, had multiple exit routes, and was equipped with sophisticated communication and security equipment disguised as standard household appliances. To any observer, it appeared to be the home of a middle-class family, complete with children's toys in the yard and a minivan in the driveway. What observers couldn't see were the reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, and hidden weapon caches that made the house nearly impregnable. They also couldn't see the team of special operations personnel positioned in supporting locations throughout the neighborhood, ready to respond to any threat within 30 seconds. Sarah entered the house using keys that had been provided through a dead-drop location, following protocols that ensured no direct contact between operatives until the meeting itself. Inside, she found a space that maintained its suburban family appearance while containing equipment that revealed its true purpose. The living room coffee table concealed a communication station capable of encrypted contact with military facilities worldwide. The kitchen refrigerator contained weapons and ammunition rather than groceries. The family photos on the walls were actually one-way observation windows that allowed occupants to monitor the surrounding area without being detected. As Sarah conducted her security sweep of the house, her encrypted communication device signaled an incoming message. Colonel Martinez was providing updated intelligence about the surveillance situation at the airport and new details about Meridian's background that made her mission even more critical. According to the latest intelligence, Meridian was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a computer systems specialist who had been recruited by the terrorist network 18 months earlier under the false impression that she would be helping to expose government corruption. Dr. Vasquez had discovered that the network was actually planning coordinated attacks on civilian targets in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., with an estimated casualty count that could exceed 10,000 people. Dr. Vasquez had attempted to leave the network quietly, but her knowledge of their operational plans made her too dangerous to simply release. She was now essentially a prisoner of the organization, allowed to move freely only because they believed she remained loyal to their cause. Her request for a meeting with Special Operations Command had been transmitted through a former colleague who worked for the State Department, using diplomatic channels that the terrorist network was not monitoring. The intelligence Dr. Vasquez possessed included detailed information about the timing of the attacks, the specific methods that would be employed, and, most importantly, the identities and locations of the network's operational cells. This information would allow authorities to prevent the attacks and dismantle the entire organization before any violence could occur. But the surveillance incident at the airport suggested that the network might have learned about Dr. Vasquez's contact with federal authorities. If they suspected her loyalty, they might have already moved to eliminate her, or they might be planning to use the meeting as an opportunity to strike against Special Operations Command personnel. Sarah's mission was to determine whether Dr. Vasquez was still a legitimate intelligence source, or whether she had become a trap designed to draw American operatives into a kill zone. The meeting location had been chosen to provide maximum security for Sarah's team, but it also meant that Dr. Vasquez will be taking enormous personal risks to make contact. At exactly 2,100 hours, Sarah's communication device signaled that Dr. Vasquez had been confirmed approaching the neighborhood. Surveillance teams reported that she appeared to be alone and was not exhibiting signs of distress or coercion. However, they also reported unusual activity in the area. Several vehicles that had been conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance of the neighborhood throughout the day. Sarah moved to the observation window that provided the best view of the approach route Dr. Vasquez would use. Through specialized optics, she could see a woman matching the description walking slowly down the street, pausing occasionally to look at house numbers, as if confirming her destination. The woman appeared nervous but determined, exactly what Sarah would expect from someone risking her life to provide critical intelligence. What concerned Sarah were the subtle signs of surveillance that her trained eye detected in the surrounding area. A van parked 3 blocks away had been in the same location for 43 minutes, which was longer than any legitimate delivery or service call would require. 2 men who appeared to be jogging had passed the same intersection 4 times, using different routes, but maintaining visual contact with the area around the safe house. Most significantly, Sarah detected the faint electronic signature of surveillance equipment operating nearby. Someone was using sophisticated listening devices or electronic monitoring systems in the vicinity. Sarah activated her secure communication system and reported her observations to Colonel Martinez. "Control, I have eyes on the package approaching the delivery point, but I'm detecting multiple indicators of hostile surveillance in the area. Request guidance on whether to proceed with the meeting." Colonel Martinez's response was immediate and decisive. "Sarah, the intelligence package represents prevention of attacks planned for this weekend. We cannot afford to abort unless you have confirmation of immediate threat to operational personnel. Proceed with meeting, but implement maximum security protocols. Sarah understood the implications of his orders. The terrorist attacks were scheduled for the coming weekend, which meant this might be the last opportunity to obtain the intelligence needed to prevent them. Aborting the meeting could save her life, but it might also condemn thousands of innocent people to death. As Dr. Vasquez approached the front door of the safe house, Sarah made her final preparations. She positioned herself to maintain visual contact with the surrounding area while conducting the debriefing, activated all electronic countermeasures to prevent eavesdropping, and ensured that her weapons were readily accessible but concealed from view. The doorbell rang once, followed by 2 quick rings, then a pause, then 3 more rings, the recognition signal that had been agreed upon through encrypted communication. Sarah opened the door and found herself face-to-face with a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark hair and tired eyes that carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. "Dr. Vasquez?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," Dr. Vasquez replied, her voice carrying a slight tremor that could have been fear or exhaustion. "You're the person I was told to meet?" "Please come in," Sarah said, stepping aside and conducting a quick visual scan of the street before closing the door. "We have a lot to discuss, and not much time to discuss it." Dr. Vasquez entered the house and immediately noticed details that revealed its true purpose. "This isn't really a family home, is it?" she asked. "It's secure," Sarah replied. "That's what matters right now. Please sit down." As Dr. Vasquez settled into the living room chair that had been positioned to provide the best security while allowing for natural conversation, Sarah began the process that would determine whether the next hour would save thousands of lives or cost 2 people theirs. "Dr. Vasquez, before we begin, I need you to understand that everything we discuss here is classified at the highest levels of government. You will never be able to discuss this information with anyone outside of authorized personnel. Do you understand and agree to these conditions?" "I understand," Dr. Vasquez replied. "And I agree. But you need to understand something too. The people I've been working with are not the idealistic activists I thought they were when I joined them. They're planning to kill innocent people, including children, and they're planning to do it this weekend." Sarah's training had prepared her for many different types of intelligence sources, some who were motivated by money, others by ideology, and still others by personal grievances. But she hadn't expected to encounter someone whose motivation was simply an unwillingness to participate in mass murder. "Tell me about the attacks," Sarah said. Dr. Vasquez opened a laptop bag she carried with her and pulled out several documents and a secure storage device. "I've been working on their computer systems for over a year, so I have access to all of their operational files. The attacks are planned for Saturday morning, during peak commuter hours in all 3 cities. She handed Sarah a document that contained details that made her blood run cold. The terrorist network had planned synchronized attacks using truck bombs positioned at critical infrastructure points in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. The bombs were designed not just to cause immediate casualties, but to disrupt emergency response systems and create maximum chaos and panic. "How many people are involved in these operations?" Sarah asked. 43 operatives total," Dr. Vasquez replied. 17 in New York, 15 in Los Angeles, and 11 in Washington. They've been positioning equipment and establishing safe houses for 6 months. Sarah reviewed the documents quickly, her trained mind processing the intelligence and recognizing the sophistication of the planning involved. This was not a simple terrorist attack. It was a coordinated assault designed to cripple American infrastructure and kill as many people as possible. "Dr. Vasquez, this intelligence could prevent a national catastrophe. But I need to ask you directly, is anyone else aware that you're providing this information to us?" Dr. Vasquez hesitated before answering, and Sarah realized that the question had touched on her greatest fear. "I don't think so, but I can't be certain." The network leader, a man named Rahman, has become increasingly suspicious of everyone in the organization. He's been conducting random loyalty tests and monitoring communications more carefully. "Have you been under surveillance?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Dr. Vasquez admitted. I've tried to be careful, but I'm not trained in this kind of work. If they suspected me, would they have allowed me to come here? Sarah was about to respond when her communication device signaled an emergency alert. She activated the secure channel and heard Colonel Martinez's voice carrying a tone of urgent concern. Sarah, surveillance teams report armed individuals taking positions around your location. You have approximately 4 minutes before they're in position to assault the safe house. Execute emergency evacuation protocols immediately. Sarah's mind shifted instantly into combat mode. The meeting had become exactly what she'd feared, a trap designed to eliminate both her and Dr. Vasquez before the intelligence could be transmitted to authorities. Dr. Vasquez, Sarah said, her voice now carrying the calm authority of someone trained for exactly this situation. We're about to be attacked. I need you to follow my instructions exactly, without question, if we're going to survive this. Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened with terror, but she nodded her understanding. What do I need to do? Sarah was already moving toward the hidden weapons cache, pulling out equipment that transformed her from a seemingly ordinary consultant into a fully equipped special operations soldier. First, you're going to help me transmit this intelligence to my command center. Then, we're going to fight our way out of here. As Sarah activated the house's defensive systems and prepared for the assault she knew was coming, she realized that Dr. Vasquez was about to discover what it meant to be protected by someone who looked ordinary, but was anything but ordinary. The next few minutes would determine whether the intelligence needed to save thousands of lives would reach the people who could act on it, or whether it would die with them in a suburban house that was about to become a battlefield. Sarah Martinez moved through the safe house with the precision of someone who had trained for this exact scenario dozens of times. Within 30 seconds, she had activated the house's automated defensive systems, established secure communication with her backup team, and begun the process of transmitting Dr. Vasquez's intelligence to Special Operations Command Headquarters. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to stay exactly where I position you, and do not move unless I give you specific instructions, Sarah said as she handed the terrified woman a protective vest. These walls are reinforced, but that protection only works if you stay behind them. Dr. Vasquez struggled with the unfamiliar equipment, her hands shaking as she tried to fasten the vest straps. How did they find us? I was so careful. Sarah was monitoring multiple communication channels while preparing defensive positions, her mind processing tactical information with the speed that came from years of training in life-or-death situations. It doesn't matter how they found us. What matters is that we get this intelligence to people who can act on it, and we get you out of here alive. The house's surveillance system revealed that the attackers were positioning themselves with military precision around the perimeter. Sarah counted at least 12 armed individuals, all carrying weapons that suggested they had access to serious firepower and tactical training. More concerning was the fact that they were using coordinated movement patterns that indicated professional combat experience. Sarah's communication device crackled with an update from Colonel Martinez. Sarah, backup teams are en route, but they're 8 minutes out. Can you hold your position? Affirmative, Sarah replied, though she knew 8 minutes was an eternity in a gunfight. Beginning intelligence transmission now. Sarah connected Dr. Vasquez's storage device to the house's secure communication system and initiated the upload process that would transmit the terrorist network's operational files to multiple government agencies simultaneously. The upload would take approximately 6 minutes to complete, 2 minutes longer than Sarah wanted, but necessary to ensure the intelligence reached everyone who needed it. Dr. Vasquez, Sarah said as she moved to the observation window that provided the best view of the approaching attackers, I need you to know that if something happens to me, you need to stay in this house until my backup team arrives. Do not try to run, and do not surrender to the people outside. Do you understand? Why can't we both just wait for your backup team? Dr. Vasquez asked, though she already suspected the answer. Because they're not going to wait, Sarah replied, checking her weapons and ammunition. They know we have intelligence that could destroy their operations, and they know backup is coming. Their only chance is to eliminate us before help arrives. As if summoned by her words, the house's motion sensors detected movement from multiple directions. The attackers were moving into assault positions, using darkness and the surrounding houses as concealment. Sarah could see muzzle flashes reflecting off windows as they prepared for coordinated attack. Sarah's training took over completely. She moved through the house, activating defensive measures that had been built into the structure during its construction. Steel shutters deployed over the windows, turning them into firing ports that could be used for defense while maintaining structural integrity. Hidden weapon positions emerged from walls that had appeared to be standard residential construction. The first shots came from the north side of the house. 3 quick rifle rounds that struck the reinforced walls and confirmed Sarah's assessment that the attackers were using military-grade weapons. She responded immediately, using a defensive position that allowed her to return fire while maintaining observation of other approach routes. Sarah's return fire was precise and controlled, each shot carefully aimed to suppress the attackers' advance rather than necessarily eliminate them. Her primary objective was to delay the assault long enough for the intelligence transmission to complete and for backup to arrive. "Control, I'm taking fire from multiple positions," Sarah reported through her secure communication system. "Intelligence transmission is 40% complete. Estimated 6 minutes until completion." Colonel Martinez's response carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what those 6 minutes meant. "Sarah, that intelligence could save 10,000 lives. Hold your position at all costs." Dr. Vasquez crouched behind the reinforced kitchen counter, trying to process what was happening around her. 6 months ago, she had been a computer programmer working for what she thought was a civil rights organization. Now she was in the middle of a gun battle, watching a woman who had appeared completely ordinary transform into a one-person army. "How are you doing this?" Dr. Vasquez called out during a brief lull in the gunfire. "Training," Sarah replied, reloading her weapon without taking her eyes off the windows. "Lots and lots of training." The attackers shifted tactics, concentrating their fire on the house's communication equipment in an attempt to disrupt the intelligence transmission. They had obviously done reconnaissance on the house and understood its capabilities better than Sarah had hoped. Sarah responded by moving to a backup communication position, but she realized that the attackers' knowledge of the house's layout suggested they had inside information about Special Operations Command safe houses. This was more than a simple attempt to eliminate a traitor. It was a sophisticated operation designed to compromise American intelligence capabilities. "Control," Sarah reported. "The attackers have detailed knowledge of this facility. We may have a security breach in our safe house protocols." "Understood," Colonel Martinez replied. "Continue with mission priorities. We'll deal with security issues after we prevent these attacks." The gunfire intensified, and Sarah realized that the attackers were preparing for a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Her defensive position was strong, but it was designed to delay attackers, not defeat a sustained assault by a numerically superior force. Sarah made a tactical decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation she possessed. She activated the house's emergency communication system and transmitted a message that would be received by every Special Operations Command facility in the country. "This is Agent Martinez at Denver's Safe House 7. I am transmitting critical intelligence regarding planned terrorist attacks scheduled for this weekend. If I do not survive to complete this mission, the intelligence will be found in the secure storage device connected to this facility's communication system. The attacks must be prevented regardless of operational costs." Dr. Vasquez heard the transmission and realized that Sarah was essentially dictating her own obituary. "You're not going to die here," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Sarah looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "Dr. Vasquez, 6 months ago you discovered that people you trusted were planning to commit mass murder. Instead of walking away quietly, you risked your life to prevent it. You've already shown more courage than most people possess. Now I need you to show a little more. What do you need me to do?" "The intelligence transmission is 70% complete. I need you to monitor the upload progress, and let me know the moment it reaches 100%. When it does, we're going to leave this house and meet my backup team at a rally point 6 blocks from here." Dr. Vasquez nodded and moved to the communication console, her fear beginning to transform into determination. She had spent months feeling helpless as she watched the terrorist network prepare for attacks she couldn't prevent. For the first time since discovering their true intentions, she was in a position to actually stop them. The attackers launched their coordinated assault just as the intelligence transmission reached 90% completion. Explosions rocked the house as they attempted to breach the reinforced doors, and automatic weapons fire concentrated on the windows in an attempt to suppress Sarah's defensive fire. Sarah moved through the house like someone who had fought this exact battle in her mind 100 times before. She used every defensive advantage the house provided, shifting positions to maintain fields of fire while avoiding the attackers' attempts to pin her down in one location. But Sarah knew that her ammunition was limited and her defensive position would eventually be overwhelmed. Her only advantage was the knowledge that every minute she delayed the attack was another minute closer to backup arrival and intelligence transmission completion. Transmission complete, Dr. Vasquez called out, her voice carrying relief and triumph. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. Regardless of what happened in the next few minutes, the intelligence needed to prevent the terrorist attacks was now in the hands of people who could act on it. Thousands of lives had just been saved. Outstanding, Sarah said, moving to Dr. Vasquez's position. Now we get out of here. Sarah activated the house's emergency evacuation system, which opened a concealed exit through what appeared to be a basement utility room, but was actually a tunnel that connected to a drainage system 3 blocks away. The tunnel had been constructed specifically for situations like this, allowing operatives to evacuate without being observed by attackers surrounding the building. Dr. Vasquez, we're going to move through a tunnel system to reach my backup team. The tunnel will be dark and confined, but it's our safest route out of here. Are you ready? Dr. Vasquez nodded, her earlier fear replaced by determination that surprised both of them. Lead the way. As they entered the tunnel system, Sarah's communication device signaled that backup teams had engaged the attackers surrounding the house. The battle was far from over, but the most important objective had already been accomplished. Sarah Martinez had once again proven that the most dangerous people are often the ones you never see coming. But this time, Dr. Elena Vasquez had proven that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, are capable of extraordinary courage. Together, they had just prevented one of the worst terrorist attacks in American history. And neither of them looked like the type of person who saves the world on a Tuesday night in suburban Denver. 6 months later, Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, reading the morning newspaper and marveling at how normal her life had become. The headline story was about a major federal investigation that had resulted in the arrest of 43 individuals connected to what authorities described as a sophisticated terrorist network planning coordinated attacks on American cities. The article provided few details about how the network had been discovered and dismantled, simply stating that federal authorities acted on credible intelligence to prevent the attacks. Dr. Vasquez knew that she and Sarah Martinez were the credible intelligence referenced in the article, but she would never be able to tell anyone about her role in preventing what could have been one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in American history. She had been relocated to Portland under a new identity, with a position at a technology company that allowed her to use her skills while maintaining the anonymity necessary for her continued safety. The terrorist network's leader, a man named Rahman, had been killed during the federal raids that followed the intelligence transmission from the Denver safe house. Most of his operational personnel had been captured before they could carry out their attacks, though 3 had escaped and remained on federal watch lists. The truck bombs that had been positioned in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. had been located and defused by bomb disposal teams who worked through the night to prevent the Saturday morning attacks. Dr. Vasquez often wondered what would have happened if she hadn't found the courage to contact federal authorities, or if Sarah Martinez hadn't been able to transmit the intelligence despite the attack on the safe house. The newspaper estimated that the coordinated attacks could have killed hundreds of people, but Dr. Vasquez had seen the operational plans. The real casualty count would likely have been the thousands, with economic and psychological damage that would have lasted for years. What the newspaper couldn't report was the personal cost of preventing those attacks. Sarah Martinez had been wounded during the battle at the safe house, though her injuries had not been life-threatening. 3 members of her backup team had been killed in the firefight with the terrorist operatives who had surrounded the house. The investigation into how the terrorists had learned about the meeting location had revealed a security breach that led to the resignation of two senior intelligence officials. Dr. Vasquez had been debriefed extensively by multiple federal agencies, providing information that led to the discovery of other terrorist cells in Europe and South America. She had spent 3 months in protective custody while authorities dismantled the network's international connections, followed by another 2 months learning how to live under her new identity. The process had been difficult in ways she hadn't anticipated. Learning to respond to a new name, developing a credible personal history, and adapting to a life where she couldn't discuss her past with anyone required constant vigilance. But it had also given her something she hadn't expected, a sense of purpose that came from knowing she had prevented a catastrophe. As Dr. Vasquez finished her coffee and prepared to leave for work, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained only a few words. "Thank you for your service. A grateful citizen." Dr. Vasquez smiled, recognizing the communication style she'd encountered 6 months earlier in a suburban safe house in Denver. Sarah Martinez was apparently doing well, and she was still watching over the people she'd helped save. Dr. Vasquez deleted the message, as she'd been trained to do with any communication that might compromise operational security. But she kept the knowledge that somewhere out there, Sarah Martinez was probably sitting in another airport security line, looking like any other business traveler, while carrying secrets that could change the world. Meanwhile, at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, Sarah Martinez approached the TSA checkpoint for what felt like the 100th time since the Denver operation. She carried the same worn leather messenger bag and wore the same type of unremarkable clothes that allowed her to blend into crowds of business travelers. The facial recognition system that had caused such confusion 6 months earlier now processed her identity smoothly, displaying a green light that indicated cleared for travel without any additional screening required. The system's database had been updated to include proper protocols for Special Operations Command personnel, eliminating the security delays that had once revealed her true identity. Agent Mike Thompson was working the checkpoint again, and he recognized Sarah as she approached his station. He'd never forgotten the morning when a seemingly ordinary passenger had turned out to be someone who required intervention from military command structures he'd never heard of. "Good morning," Thompson said, processing Sarah's identification with the same professional courtesy he showed every passenger. But he watched her more carefully now, noticing details he'd missed during their first encounter. Sarah moved through the checkpoint with the same calm efficiency she'd always displayed, but Thompson now recognized the subtle signs of extensive training in her posture and movements. She maintained awareness of everyone around her without appearing suspicious, positioned herself to maintain clear sight lines to exits, and carried herself with the controlled confidence of someone who could handle any situation that might arise. "Have a safe flight," Thompson said as he returned her identification. "Thank you," Sarah replied with a smile that seemed more genuine than the polite expressions most passengers manage during the stress of airport travel. As Sarah walked toward her gate, Thompson found himself wondering where she was going and what she would do when she got there. 6 months earlier, he would have assumed she was heading to a business meeting or conference. Now he understood that her destinations and activities operated on a level of importance he could barely imagine. Thompson also realized that Sarah Martinez represented something most people never considered. There were individuals moving through the world every day, looking completely ordinary, while carrying responsibilities and capabilities that remained completely hidden from public view. They sat in airplane seats next to doctors and teachers, stood in line at coffee shops behind accountants and engineers, and walked through airports alongside tourists and business travelers. These invisible protectors worked to prevent threats that most people would never know had existed, solved problems that could have affected millions of lives, and made sacrifices that would never be recognized by the people they served. They looked like everyone else, but they were anything but ordinary. Sarah Martinez's flight to Chicago would take her to a meeting with intelligence analysts who were tracking weapons trafficking networks in Eastern Europe. The information she would provide had been gathered during a 3-week operation in Romania that required her to pose as an art dealer while infiltrating an organization that was selling military equipment to criminal groups. The operation had been successful, resulting in the seizure of enough weapons to supply a small army and the arrest of 12 individuals connected to the trafficking network. But, like most of Sarah's successes, it would never be publicly acknowledged, and the people whose safety had been enhanced by her work would never know her name. As Sarah's plane taxied toward the runway, she reflected on the changes that had occurred since the Denver operation. Dr. Vasquez was safely established in her new life. The terrorist network had been dismantled, and the attacks that could have killed thousands of people had been prevented. But Sarah also knew that other threats were emerging, other networks were forming, and other attacks were being planned by people who wanted to harm innocent civilians. Her work would continue because the need for her work would always continue. The man sitting next to Sarah on the flight to Chicago was Dr. James Morrison, a college professor heading to an academic conference. Like Dr. Kim 6 months earlier, Dr. Morrison was the type of traveler who enjoyed airplane conversations. Business or pleasure? Dr. Morrison asked as the plane reached cruising altitude. Business, Sarah replied with the same smile she'd used 100 times before. Consulting work. What kind of consulting? Risk assessment and security consulting. I help organizations evaluate their vulnerability to various kinds of threats. Dr. Morrison nodded with interest. That sounds important, especially with everything happening in the world these days. More important than most people realize, Sarah said, turning to look out the window at the landscape passing below. What Dr. Morrison couldn't know was that he was sitting next to someone who had helped prevent one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in American history. He couldn't know that the seemingly ordinary woman reading a paperback novel beside him had fought a gun battle in a suburban safe house to protect intelligence that saved thousands of lives. He couldn't know that Sarah Martinez was one of a small group of people who worked in shadows to keep the world safe for people like him. But perhaps that was exactly the way it should be. Perhaps the most important work was done by people who looked so ordinary that no one would ever suspect them of being extraordinary. Perhaps the best protectors were the ones who remained invisible, allowing the people they protected to live normal lives without ever knowing how much danger they'd been in. As the plane continued toward Chicago, Sarah Martinez closed her eyes and allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The world was safer today because she and Dr. Vasquez had found the courage to do what needed to be done. Thousands of people would wake up tomorrow morning without ever knowing that their lives had been saved by two women who'd looked like the least threatening people in the room. Sometimes the most important victories are won by people no one ever sees coming. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never get recognition for their heroism. And sometimes the difference between tragedy and safety comes down to ordinary-looking people who are willing to do extraordinary things when the world needs them most. 6 months after a routine airport security check had revealed the existence of Special Operations Command to 2 surprise TSA agents, the world continued to turn safely on its axis, protected by invisible guardians who worked in shadows and asked for no recognition beyond the knowledge that they had done their jobs well. Sarah Martinez was one of those guardians, and she was exactly where she needed to be, hidden in plain sight, ready for whatever threat would emerge next, looking like anyone else, but prepared for anything the world might demand of her. The machine had been right that morning in Washington, D.C. It had detected someone who required special recognition. But the most important recognition Sarah Martinez would ever receive was the knowledge that when evil had threatened innocence, she had stood in the gap and refused to let it pass. Sometimes that's all the recognition a hero needs.